The diplomatic gambit. The crystalline walls of Nexus Prime reflected the soft glow of distant stars as Captain Marcus Webb adjusted his formal uniform one final time. The space station served as neutral ground for the most delicate negotiations the galaxy had ever witnessed. After 3 years of brutal conflict between humanity and the Zorathi Empire, both sides had finally agreed to discuss terms for peace. Marcus stood in the observation deck, watching the sleek Zorathi vessels dock with fluid grace. Their ships moved like living creatures through space, all curves and flowing lines that seemed to defy conventional engineering. It reminded him why this war had been so devastating. The Zorathi weren't just technologically advanced. They were fundamentally different from humans in ways that made understanding each other nearly impossible. "Nervous, Captain?" "Ambassador." Helena Cross approached him, her weathered face showing the strain of months preparing for these talks. She had been humanity's chief diplomat for over 2 decades, and if anyone could navigate these treacherous waters, it was her. "Just observing," Marcus replied, though his hand unconsciously moved to the scar along his jaw, a memento from the Battle of Kepler Station. "Their delegation is larger than expected." Helena nodded grimly. "Lord Commander Zaris doesn't do anything small. The Zorathi see diplomacy as theater, and they intend to put on quite a show." The main conference hall buzzed with quiet tension as delegates from both species took their positions. The Zorathi sat across from the humans, their tall, elegant forms draped in flowing robes that seemed to shift color in the light. Their skin had a subtle luminescent quality, and their eyes held depths that suggested intelligence far beyond human understanding. At the head of the Zorathi delegation sat Lord Commander Zaris Veth, his presence commanding even in stillness. His crystalline crown caught the light, casting rainbow patterns across the polished table. To his right sat a figure that made Marcus pause. Princess Lyrian Veth was stunning in a way that transcended species. Her skin held the same ethereal glow as her father's, but where his features were sharp and imposing, hers carried an unexpected warmth. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and when her gaze briefly met Marcus's across the room, he felt something electric pass between them. The negotiations proceeded with predictable formality. Trade routes, territorial boundaries, reparations for war damages, all the mechanical aspects of ending a conflict. Marcus found his attention drifting to the Zorathi princess, who sat silently throughout most discussions. Unlike the other delegates, who actively participated, she seemed almost trapped. Hours passed before Lord Commander Zaris rose to address the assembly. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Honored delegates," he began, his words flowing like music despite their alien cadence. "We have discussed the practical matters of peace. But true understanding between our peoples requires more than signed documents. It requires connection." A murmur rippled through the human delegation. Ambassador Cross leaned forward slightly, her diplomatic instincts sharpening. Zaris smiled, though there was something cold in his expression. "Therefore, in the spirit of unity, I offer a gesture of goodwill." He gestured toward his daughter. "Princess Lyrian, my most treasured child, shall serve as a bridge between our species. I offer her hand in ceremonial marriage to any human brave enough to accept such an honor." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he realized what had just happened. This wasn't a genuine offer, it was a test, perhaps even an insult. The Lord Commander was essentially daring the humans to accept what he clearly expected them to decline. Princess Lyrian's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes. She had known this was coming, and she was prepared to be used as a pawn in her father's game. "Of course," Zaris continued with false magnanimity, "this is merely symbolic, a temporary arrangement to demonstrate our commitment to peace. Unless, naturally, one of your number finds the prospect genuinely appealing." The challenge hung in the air like a weapon. Marcus could see Ambassador Cross calculating the political ramifications. could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. This was exactly the kind of trap that could derail the entire peace process. That's when Princess Lyrian stood. She moved with liquid grace, her robes flowing around her like water. Without permission from her father or acknowledgement of the shocked murmurs filling the room, she walked directly toward the human delegation. Her eyes never left Marcus's face. "Captain Webb," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed to resonate in his chest. "You commanded the defense of Kepler Station." It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded slowly, unsure where this was leading. "My brother died in that battle," she continued, and Marcus felt his heart sink. But then she smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "He was leading a raid on your medical facilities. You could have destroyed his ship, but you disabled it instead. 63 Zorathi lives were spared because of your decision." Marcus remembered that day. The enemy vessel had been defenseless after its weapons were knocked offline. Standard military doctrine would have been to eliminate the threat, but something had stayed his hand. "They were no longer combatants," he said simply. Princess Lyrian stepped closer, close enough that he could see the complex patterns of light that moved beneath her skin. "That is why," she said, raising her voice so the entire assembly could hear. "If Captain Webb will have me, I accept this union willingly." The room erupted. Lord Commander Xeris's face darkened with surprise and something that might have been anger. Ambassador Cross looked like she might faint. But Marcus found himself looking only at Lyrian, seeing past her ethereal beauty to something deeper, a desperate hope mixed with fierce determination. Before he could think through the consequences, before diplomatic training could kick in and stop him, Marcus stood and took her outstretched hand. "Princess Lyrian," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "It would be my honor." The next few hours passed in a blur of hasty ceremonies and diplomatic scrambling. The Zorathi had rituals for everything, and apparently impromptu royal weddings were no exception. Marcus found himself standing in a smaller chamber, wearing ceremonial robes that felt like wearing liquid starlight, as an elderly Zorathi priest chanted in their flowing language. Princess Lyrian stood beside him, radiant in traditional wedding, attire that seemed to be made of crystallized moonbeams. But it was her eyes that held his attention, eyes that spoke of gratitude, determination, and something else he was afraid to name. The ceremony concluded with the exchange of mental bonds, a Zorathi custom that allowed married couples to share thoughts and emotions. As Lyrian's fingers touched his temples, Marcus felt a rush of sensation unlike anything he'd ever experienced. For a moment he could feel what she felt, the suffocating weight of expectations, the desperate hunger for freedom. And beneath it all, a growing warmth directed at him. When the bond settled, they were no longer strangers. Marcus could sense her presence at the edge of his consciousness, could feel her relief and gratitude flowing toward him like a gentle current. "Thank you," she whispered, as the priest concluded his blessings. "For what?" Marcus asked, though the mental bond gave him hints of the answer. "For seeing me," she replied. "Not the princess, not the political tool, not the joke my father intended. Just me." As they left the ceremony chamber together, Marcus realized that what had begun as a diplomatic incident had become something else entirely. The woman walking beside him wasn't just a Zorathi princess or a political alliance. She was Lyrian, and somehow in the space of a few hours, she had become the most important person in his world. Behind them, Lord Commander Xeris watched with calculating eyes. His joke had backfired spectacularly, but Marcus could sense through the mental bond that this was far from over. The Lord Commander had not expected his daughter to actually go through with the marriage, and he certainly hadn't expected her to find happiness in it. The stars outside Nexus Prime seemed to pulse with anticipation as the newlywed couple walked toward an uncertain future, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. What had started as political theater was becoming something real, something powerful, and something that would change both their species forever. Hearts beyond politics. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding ceremony, and the quarters assigned to Captain Webb and Princess Lyrian aboard Nexus Prime had become their sanctuary. The space was larger than standard diplomatic housing, a compromise between human practicality and Zorathi aesthetic preferences. Flowing curves met clean lines, and the lighting could be adjusted from the harsh brightness humans preferred to the soft, color-shifting glow the Zorathi found soothing. Marcus woke each morning to find Lyrian already awake, sitting by the great viewport that dominated their main living area. She would be motionless, her luminescent skin catching the starlight, and for a moment he would wonder if he was still dreaming. The mental bond they shared had grown stronger over the weeks, allowing them to sense each other's emotions even when separated by distance. This morning was different. Instead of her usual serene contemplation, Marcus felt waves of anxiety and something else through their connection. He sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Lyrian," he called softly. She turned from the window, and he could see the worry etched in her features. Her skin, normally a soft pearl-like luminescence, flickered with rapid patterns of silver and blue, a Zorathi stress response he'd learned to recognize. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that spoke of barely controlled emotion. Marcus rose and moved to sit beside her, not touching but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The Zorathi ran naturally warmer than humans, something that had taken him time to adjust to but now found comforting. "What's wrong?" he asked, though the bond was already giving him hints. Fear, uncertainty, and underneath it all, a fierce protective instinct that made his heart race. Lyrian placed a hand over her abdomen, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Through their mental connection, he could feel what she felt. A new presence, small but undeniably there. A flutter of life that was part human, part Zorathi, and entirely unexpected. "The medical scan this morning confirmed it," she said quietly. "I'm carrying our child." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but not from shock or dismay. Instead, he felt a surge of protectiveness so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. Their child. Something that shouldn't have been possible according to both species' understanding of biology, yet was happening anyway. "How is that even possible?" he whispered. Lyrian's laugh held no humor. "The mental bond, it's more than just emotional connection. It creates biological compatibility at a cellular level. It's ancient Zorathi knowledge, forbidden because it was considered too dangerous. My father knows this, which is why he was so shocked when I actually went through with the ceremony." The implications hit Marcus immediately. He never expected the bond to form properly. He thought it would be a sham marriage. Exactly. Lyrian stood and began pacing, her movements agitated. A human Zorathi hybrid hasn't been born in over 1,000 years. The last time it happened, it nearly started a war between our species. The child was seen as an abomination by both sides. Marcus felt his jaw clench. This child is not an abomination. The fierce certainty in his voice seemed to calm Lyrian slightly. She stopped pacing and looked at him with something that might have been hope. "My father will demand that I return to Zorathi space," she continued. "He'll claim that I was contaminated by human contact, that the child must be studied or—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Marcus felt her terror through the bond. "Over my dead body," he said, standing to face her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the bond between them flared with shared determination. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The door chimed, interrupting their moment. Ambassador Cross's voice came through the communication system, tight with urgency. "Captain Webb, Princess Lyrian, I need to see you both immediately. We have a situation." They found Ambassador Cross in the station's main conference room, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the holographic display showing a massive Zorathi battle fleet positioned just outside the system. "They arrived an hour ago," she said without preamble. "Lord Commander Zaris is demanding his daughter's immediate return. He's claiming the marriage was conducted under false pretenses and that Princess Lyrian is being held against her will." Marcus felt Lyrian's hand slip into his, her fingers cold despite her normally warm skin. Through their bond, he could sense her resolve hardening. I won't go, she said simply. Ambassador Cross looked haggard. Princess, with respect, you may not have a choice. That fleet could obliterate this station if they choose to. We have a small defensive force, but against those numbers, there's something else, Lyrian said quietly. Something my father doesn't know yet. We're expecting a child. The color drained from Ambassador Cross's face. A human Zorathi hybrid? Is that a problem? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. It's a miracle, Cross breathed, and potentially the most dangerous thing that could happen right now. If word of this reaches certain factions on either side. A new voice cut through the tension. Then perhaps we should discuss this situation properly. They turned to see Lord Commander Xeris standing in the doorway, flanked by two imposing Zorathi guards. His crystalline crown caught the light, but his expression was thunderous. Father, Lyrian said, stepping slightly in front of Marcus. You have no authority here. I have every authority over my daughter, Xeris replied coldly, particularly when she has been manipulated into a union that serves only human interests. Manipulated? Marcus stepped forward, his diplomatic training warring with his protective instincts. Your daughter made her own choice. Xeris's laugh was like breaking glass. Did she? Or did you use her gratitude over her brother's life to coerce her into this farce? The accusation hit harder than Marcus expected, but before he could respond, Lyrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Enough. The single word carried such authority that even Xeris fell silent. Lyrian stepped into the center of the room, her skin now blazing with silver light, a sign of Zorathi royal power that Marcus had never seen before. I am not a child to be bartered with, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to thrum with power. I am not a pawn in your political games, and I am not a mistake to be corrected. She turned to face her father, directly. I chose Marcus Webb. I chose to bond with him knowing full well what it would mean, and now I carry his child, our child, and I will not allow you or anyone else to use that child as an excuse for war. The silence that followed was deafening. Xeris's face cycled through several emotions before settling on cold fury. You carry a human spawn, he said, the words dripping with disgust. I carry the future, Lyrian replied firmly. A bridge between our species, created not through politics or conquest but through love. Marcus felt his chest swell with pride at her words, but also with fear. He could see the calculation in Xeris's eyes, the wheels turning as the Lord Commander considered his options. You will return with me, Xeris said finally. The child will be studied, and proper measures will be taken to ensure this incident doesn't compromise either of our species. No, the refusal came from Marcus, but it was echoed by Lyrian through their mental bond. They stood together, facing down the most powerful military leader in the Zorathi Empire. Then you have chosen war, Xeris said quietly. We've chosen love, Lyrian replied. And if that leads to war, then so be it. But our child will be born free, not as a specimen to be studied or a weapon to be wielded. The standoff stretched for long moments before Xeris turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. You have 1 hour to reconsider, he said without turning back. After that, I will take you by force if necessary. When the door closed behind him, the room seemed to deflate. Ambassador Cross slumped in her chair, looking every one of her 60 years. This could start another war, she said quietly. Then we'll face it together, Marcus replied, pulling Lyrian close. Through their bond, he felt her fear and determination mixing with his own. Our child deserves better than this, Lyrian whispered, against his chest. Our child will have better than this, Marcus promised, no matter what it takes. Outside the conference room windows, the Zorathi fleet waited like a promise of violence. But inside, a human and a Zorathi held each other close, their bond stronger than politics, their love deeper than the space between stars. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together, as equals, as partners, and as parents to a child who represented hope for both their species. The hour that followed would determine whether that hope would survive to see the light of day.